Okay, I'm going to talk today about constructionism, project-based learning, and learning by design. And probably one of the principal proponents of this approach is Seymour Papert. I read his first book, Mindstorms. It was published in 1980. It's one of the most influential books that I read. I subsequently read his book that was, I think, published in 1996 called The Children's Machine. Also a very influential book if you really want to delve deeply into this idea of constructionism. He is the principal proponent of it. He is a computer science professor at MIT, and also at some point in his life studied with Jean Piaget. So a lot of the constructionist notions that Piaget had were passed on to Seymour Papert. Okay? All right. And this is the Venn diagram that's in the chapter. It's in the problem-based learning chapter, and it's in the project-based learning chapter. And I spent a lot of time talking about this in my presentation on problem-based learning, so I'm not going to spend as much time in this presentation on this, except to talk about the number one thing in the blue. The blue text is the blue circle, circle that represents those things that are project-based learning. And the first thing is that it begins with an end product or artifact in mind, but more importantly, the students get to choose what that end product is. And so one of my favorite motivational models is the 6 C's of motivation. The first of those C's is choice. And with problem-based learning, they don't get that choice. They have to. Your mission is to get them to buy into solving the problem, and hopefully they will find that interesting and engage in that. But with project-based learning, you give them a little bit more choice because they can choose what you're going to do. What you want them to learn about is I don't know, modern Japan, they could do that in a variety of different ways with a variety of different projects. And so they can choose to look at modern art, or they could look at modern music in Japan. And so they could tie into their already, the interests that they have already, and use those interests to explore the new content that they're trying to learn. So for me, that's one of the principal differences between these two. And you can go to the problem-based presentation to get a lot more information about this particular screen. All right. Project-based learning, constructionism, learning by design. It's all about learning by building something, but I hate to reduce it to that because the word constructionism, for example, it's almost inherent in that people think about it in that much more reduced fashion, because you learn by constructing. Learning by design, you learn by designing something. Project-based learning, you learn by building a project. But it's more than that. And the more than that is the conversations that you have in your team. That's why collaboration is such an important element of these models. Is that a lot of the learning occurs as you engage in conversations about whatever it is that you're trying to build. So it's the conversations that are important, not necessarily the thing that you're building, the thing itself. The thing itself is also important, but it's the conversations and thought processes that you're engaging in as you go through the creation of whatever it is. So it's learning by building, but it's more than that. All right, so similarities between learning by design, project-based learning, and constructionism. So what are the outcomes of these models? Well, one of the principal outcomes is that kids who engage in it, learners who engage in project-based learning are very motivated. They just, because they're engaging in a project that they really care about, they're really motivated. If they're adult learners and they're working on project-based learning, it's immediately relevant to their context. We used to teach an instructional design class to adults in the business community in Atlanta, and we always had them choose a project from their work context, and so they did so much more work when they were solving a real problem that they faced in their workplace than if we gave them some sort of artificial problem to solve. So they did a lot more work, and they did a lot more work because they were a lot more motivated, because they were not only doing it for the class, but they were doing it for their job. Almost all of the models, all of the research that's been done on it is the importance of collaboration and self-regulation and being student-centered. And probably one of the most important things for K-12 schools is that there's also an increase in standardized test scores as a result of engaging in project-based learning. And the reason for that is that what they learn is more memorable, that it stays in their head a lot longer than the things that they teach in a traditional way. So when you deliver direct instruction, it's efficient in the sense that you can cover a lot of content in a very short period of time. It's not very efficient in that most of it students forget. So they remember it long enough to spew it out on the test, but soon after the test they've forgotten it. And often standardized tests happen much later, and so by the time they take standardized tests, they've forgotten all of it. When you use project-based learning, it's learned in such a way that they retain it for a much longer period of time, because it's much more personally meaningful to them. And you might not learn as much, but what you do learn, you've learned, you've got it. And so when you take a test, you actually do better because what you have learned, you've remembered, and often the things that you learned in a more superficial way, you also remember because you have this really strong foundational piece of knowledge that you could tie new things to. All right. Other relevant theories that besides project-based learning, obviously cognitive apprenticeships and scaffolding tie into this, but other chapters that I cover later in this course are collaborative learning and the 6 C's of motivation, and they're quite relevant. Probably another one that's equally relevant is the idea of resource-based learning, because as they engage in these projects, one of the things that you spend a lot of time in doing is gathering a lot of resources that they can make use of. And some of those resources are print-based, some of them are web-based, some of them are pictures, some of them are audio tapes or CDs or DVDs or videotapes. Or, I mean, you think of all the different media that you might make use of as you engage in some sort of project. There's lots of resources you can bring to bear. Okay? All right, so what's the big difference between these three theories? Constructionism is all about deriving meaning from the thing you create. Your learning is derived from the creation of the artifact, but talking about it is equally as important. So I've already talked about that. That's kind of the central idea of construction, is you have to engage in conversations. Project-based learning focuses on authentic experiences, focuses on the product of the collaboration, and the product of collaboration of creating what you're doing. So really, again, the central focus is collaboration. Learning by design is probably the one that's the most different, in that as you engage in designing whatever you're doing, is to ask these more metacognitive kinds of questions, like addressing any problem, whether it is embedded in construction of an artifact, solving a word problem. Let's see. Future yes. Oh, here's the 4th question, sorry. What is its purpose? To continually be asking yourself as you're engaging, what is its purpose? What is its structure? What are model cases of it? What are arguments that explain and evaluate it? So these 4 driving questions, you probably put them up, if you're going to engage in this in a learning setting, whether it's a classroom or online or whatever, as the learners are engaged in this design activity, you want a web page or up on a bulletin board these 4 driving questions that they continually ask themselves as they're engaging in their design activity. Purpose, structure, what are some model cases, and what are some arguments to explain and evaluate. So in constructionism and in project-based learning, it's so important to engage in conversation. Well, what are some of the conversations you can have? Well, you can use some of these questions to instigate some of those conversations. Okay? All right. Constructionism, presentation of rubrics which define expectations. And I almost always use rubrics. Rubrics is a central evaluation strategy, whether you're using project-based learning or problem-based learning. You generate your rubric before they start the project so that and that's something else that I typically put in some public setting, either on a bulletin board or on the web pages. The rubrics is readily available as they're engaging in the process. They're clear. Everybody's clear about what the expectations are. Dialogue on interpretation of so you have to engage in conversations. You have to engage in conversations within the students and between the students and you as the facilitator of the learning. Exploration of multiple strategies for tackling the assignment. So you might get them to engage. You might draw them back and say, okay, well, you're going down this path. Are there other paths before you get too far down that path? Are there other alternative paths? Engage in inquiry and learning discussions. There needs to be some sort of presentation of the work, and often you want that presentation to be outside of the context of the class. You don't want them to be producing it just for you as the teacher/facilitator. You want them to present that to a larger audience. If what they're building would be of interest to the whole school, you have them present to the whole school. If it has interest to the local community, have them present to the local community, whatever the stakeholders might be that they're working on the project for. Projects which include revision and development of an idea. And that's probably one of the most important parts of project-based learning, is to have many opportunities for revision, that they don't give you the first draft of it. All right. Learners collaborating with each other. Otherwise, conversations can't happen. Learners working with outside professionals in the world. That's a really common approach to project-based learning, is to bring external experts into the conversation, whether they come to a classroom or they connect via some kind of communication technology. You bring professionals with real-world experience into the context of solving working on the projects. And then there's this genuine real-world feel for these projects. Okay, learning by design. It's got an authentic task. The task is based on some real-world application. You're going to design some real thing. Multiple context for design activities, because you can do them in lots of different ways. A balance of constrained scaffold challenges with open-ended design tasks. So you can do a much more constrained kind of thing initially and then make it more open-ended as they go forward. Rich, varied feedback for designers, discussions and collaborative work, experimental, exploratory work, reflection. So again, you have to have conversations and you have to have time for reflection. Project-based learning summary. It's learner-centered, it's collaborative. You constrain them by making sure that whatever project they're engaged in is relevant to the curriculum that you're teaching. The tasks often are authentic. There are multiple expression modes. So one of the things that we'll learn about later is learning styles and multiple intelligences. And so some people, a really interesting approach for project-based learning is to allow them to express themselves in a more artistic way, or a more musical way, or in a more logical way, or whatever way that they're you can allow them to take advantage of some of the strengths that they have in one or another kind of intelligence. One of the most important problems that you have to solve in this process is to help them with time management, because they can engage in these conversations and not make a lot of progress towards completion of their project. So you need to really help them with time management. And then innovative assessment really means rubrics, and so we use rubrics. Okay, I hope this helped. You have your book chapter to read, which is really well written, and so you might review that. And if that doesn't help, you're welcome to email me any questions that you might have. Have a good day. Bye-bye.